Colin, thank you very much for joining us today. Looking back on your career, over 300 appearances for Boro, a couple of England caps and plenty of trophies on the way. Just take us back to the very start and how you first got involved in football.
Oh God! Well, there was nothing else for me as a kid. Where I grew up in Trimden, the son of a coal miner. That's all we ever did. That's all we ever did. It's the old adage: jumpers for goalposts, etc., etc. Me and my mates. That's all we ever did. We played football day in, day out. And then obviously, that's just what you do as a kid. And then I think when I was 7, went to the local primary school around the corner, and that was probably the first time that I had a sports teacher who kind of looked at me, and by this point I was on a year high, and he said to me, as a 7-year-old, he put me in the school team as a 7-year-old. I was, like I say, I was tiny, I was skinny, and obviously the kit didn't fit me. The socks came up to here, the shirt went down to my ankles, and he was the first one to say, go and play and enjoy yourself. And like I say, that was a 7-year-old, and I still keep in touch with that man to this day, Keith Taylor, and yeah. So what you find is through your journey is there's always at particular points in your life there is either someone or something that happens that gives you an opportunity to go to the next level. My dad was a real keen football fan, and he played as a young man himself, but not to any level, like local leagues around the County Durham, around the pit areas in County Durham. My mum is from a football background because my granddad, who I unfortunately never met, he was once asked to be a scout for Sunderland because he run local teams in and around Coxall, in County Durham, where my mum's from. So there's always football around, and like I say, I'm the youngest of 3, and I've got 2 elder sisters, so they were doing ballroom dancing and I was doing football, even though they did try and make me a ballroom dancer as well.
But of course you got that opportunity to play football professionally and you signed for Middlesbrough in 1984. Just what was it like being a young player around that time at the club?
Very difficult actually. I mean, because again, all I refer to is, even though again there was certain, so the scout who picked me up at 13, Don Cowan, and again got to keep reiterating, I was tiny as a kid. Played for all the school teams, captained all my school teams, just basically because I was a bit gobby and and I shouted a lot even as a kid. But I was tiny, and again you meet people along the way. So Don Cowan always said to my parents, he'll be absolutely fine, don't worry. And at 13, which was the old time, obviously the academies now take kids in at 5 and develop them and then come full time at 9. But in them days, you signed an associated schoolboy form at 13. That was when you kind of affiliated yourself to one club. Now at 13, this scout had a big impression on me, and my mum and dad. But I could have signed for 10 other clubs. But even going back then, and as I say, as the son of 2 parents who were massive Sunderland fans, even my mum would tell you to this day, my granddad would turn in his grave when I'd signed for Middlesbrough and I didn't sign for Sunderland. But the opportunity came, and as I say, this scout kind of resonated with me. Middlesbrough, even going back all them years, had a reputation of blooding young players. Whether that was something in the background, I doubt, but it was true. Even back in the days, they always give young players an opportunity to play. So, so I signed associated schoolboy at 13, and then basically for the next 2 years, you go in on school holidays and you play trial games and etc., etc. And then it comes to the crunch whether you get offered an apprenticeship or you don't. The next bit of luck came when I was 16, and again, so I left school at 16, 5'2". Having done all of my GCEs and CSEs, left school at 16, 5'2". I would not have been a footballer today through that. The YTS scheme was introduced that year. I wasn't given an apprenticeship, so the apprenticeship was 2 years guaranteed at the football club. I was on the brink because I was small and I wasn't growing. And I guess as a young boy, going through all them things you do as a 15, 16-year-old boy, I was really on the brink. And what the then youth team manager, Willie Madron, said is we had the option of using the YTS scheme. So there was, I think there was six lads who were given a full-term apprenticeship, and there was another 6 of us who were given a 1-year opportunity on a YTS scheme. And again, so then the next point is you come across another guy who believes in you, who sees things, and that guy was Willie Madron. And so I had a year with Willie in the youth team, and basically at 17, Willie said to me, he said, you're ready. So from being on the brink within that year of training full-time and starting to grow, certainly not filling out, but starting to grow, Willie just said, you know, I think you'll be a player. So I was given a professional contract at 17, and that was the beginning of the journey. So again, you talk about them important stages in plotting your graph to where you want to get to. And at 16, Willie Madron was the most important thing that happened to me. He gave me an opportunity, and then give me my first professional contract. And ultimately, you know, when the club was obviously struggling financially, Willie was promoted to first team manager, and Willie put me in the first team squad, and give me my debut as well. So he's a man that's always resonated with me. And also at that time when I joined, Malcolm Allison was in the club. A guy called Danny Bagara, who was very big on technical, and as was Malcolm, was all about playing good football. You know, Malcolm had done it with Manchester City, produced some really fantastic teams and players. So when he came into the club, it was all about technique. Willie was like I say, an exceptional man on the coaching side, as well as being a great man. And so again, you get little lucky breaks all the way down the line. And were it not for certain people down the line, I'm 100% convinced that I wouldn't have gotten to where I got to.
And as you mentioned, those hard times at the club financially, in 1986, you know, avoiding liquidation and rising from the ashes and back-to-back promotions. You were part of that squad who, you know, rose from the 3rd division to the 1st division. I mean, just what was it like for the club to achieve that in such a short space of time?
Well, I think the one thing I always remember, and again, you've got to remember I was in 86, was 19. I'd played a dozen games in the first team in the season previous when we got relegated. So basically, I didn't have a football career. And my football career again was disappearing, you know, when the club went into liquidation. So there's an awful lot said about them lads. I didn't have an opportunity to go anywhere else. So basically my chance in life was either to leave Middlesbrough and go and try and trial out somewhere else and try and go on trial and have another go. Which the then chief scout Barry Geldard had said, you know, we can line things up for you if the club goes under. But I think realistically, having gotten in the first team and played 12 games, it was really, I had one shot, and it was that we stuck together and we went for it. The one thing I always say is that you can't, when you get lads who've 19, 20, 21 who have got girlfriends or who are engaged or even married, which some of the lads were at that time, I think when you're offered an opportunity to earn some money and you're not guaranteed any money somewhere else, I personally, sometimes, you know, there's been a lot said about the likes of Peter Beagrie and etc. They took an option that was open to them. I and quite a few of the other lads, we know we didn't have another option. So what we had to do was we had to nail our heads down, get on with it. And I think again we got very lucky in the fact that with Bruce and with Toddy and with Brian Little and people like Eddie Gray who were in and around the club around them times, you think about them people as A, as footballers, but B, as men. And again, we did rise from the ashes, and thank goodness that the consortium with Steve and Newcastle Breweries, etc. And thank goodness, you know, because if you then look even to us now, and when we all got together for Parky to try and raise some money to keep Parky's treatment going, you look at them players, and you go, Stephen Pears, wonderful goalkeeper who should have played for England and played for England B. Were it not for, he should have played for, or he'd getting into the England squad. Did he not fracture his cheekbone? You get Stuart Ripley played for England. Gary Pallister played for England. Tony Mowbray played England B. I played England. Bernie Slaven played Republic of Ireland. Gary Hamilton played, I think, B, Scotland. So out of 14 players, which is that's what we had. Out of 14 players, you've got 7 internationals. So we got lucky that A, we were talented, which, you know, you've got to look back and say there was talent. We got organised and we got disciplined with Bruce. And you look at the people that were around. You've got a wonderful footballer like Brian Little, Eddie Gray, unbelievable defender in Colin Todd, there was all of the aspects were there that had the opportunity to create the building blocks with the lads that were left. And all I can say is, I think all the lads will agree, all we did is we just got our heads down, worked really hard, turned up every day, did what was asked of us, as in, you know, because Bruce had his ways, you know. I mean, I didn't shave until I was 25, but everybody had to be clean shaven, we all had to dress smartly. And Tony Mowbray will tell you to this day, I still follow them rules to this day, and that's just a discipline within you. And as I say, so again, you look at the next little lucky point in your career, coming across them 4, 5 brilliant people who give you the opportunity to mould yourself into a better person, better player. And that's one of the philosophies that I use when I'm working with young players. We're not here just to make you a better player, we're here to make you a better person as well.
Mould yourself you did, and off the back of that you went and played at Wembley for the first time with Middlesbrough. That must have been another proud achievement to add to your...
It was tough. You know what, that was a really tough one, because at the time, I think people may or may not remember, I was really struggling with a broken foot. I didn't know it was broken, but I was struggling with a really painful foot. Bruce obviously left. Toddy was in charge when we went to Wembley for the ZDS, and obviously Tony walked the team out. So if you think about that period, it was brilliant that we actually got the opportunity to go and play at the old Wembley for our club. But because of results, you know, we were kind of sliding. Bruce had left, but the opportunity to play at Wembley was wonderful. But I always remember the days as thinking, like, I know Tony Dorigo scored an excellent free kick, but I always remember the days like a really massive missed opportunity. But I know for a fact I certainly wasn't firing on all cylinders. I was struggling with injury, I was struggling with form, I think at the time, as I remember. I think Jimmy Phillips had just come in the club, so I was in and out of the team. So again, there's things that happen, and yes, it was a wonderful experience to play at Wembley. But if you then look back at the actual things that surrounded when we actually did get to Wembley, and obviously Bruce leaving, Toddy taking the team, Tony leading the team out, which was really a positive thing. It was brilliant to play at Wembley, but it has really mixed emotions for me, really mixed.
And your first spell at the club came to an end shortly after that. You went to Millwall. How did that move kind of come about to go there? Well,
again, the only thing I would say is, I think if you can look at yourself in the mirror and look honestly, I was playing really poorly. I say I'd been struggling with for a year, best part of a year and a half with this broken foot, which, you know, I'd pushed myself when we got through the promotions, and I'd pushed myself to the limit physically, because, you know, I had to get injections in my foot just to train and just to play. So that, you know, that's a lesson for young players, that that managers would never do that to young players now. I wanted to play and was more than happy to take the injections to play, because I just wanted to play. You know, we'd played 2-3 full seasons on the bounce, most of us, out of that 14. Things had changed slightly after we got into the what's the Premier League now, into Division 1, because Bruce had to try and strengthen the squad, bring people in, and that kind of shifted the balance a little bit, because we all knew we were in it together. Then all of a sudden you get people coming from the outside, which kind of changes the dynamic. But from my own personal point of view, I was playing poorly, really poorly. In the summer of 91, I'd just been married to Julie, and basically I said to Bruce York for me, because Bruce was obviously at Millwall, he'd just taken over the manager's job, and he said, why don't you come and have a fresh start? He knew that I knew that if I'd stayed at Middlesbrough, and that things wouldn't have been the same as how they ended up. Very, very graciously, Lenny Lawrence on many occasions has said to me that it's the worst piece of business I ever did letting you go. But I said to Lenny, if I'd have stayed at Middlesbrough in 91 through the period that you were there, you wouldn't have seen me as I ended up a few years later, because I was, like I say, my career was definitely on a level, and it was starting to dip. Everything had been brilliant up until that. You know, we'd all got rave reviews, and obviously Gary had gone on and done his thing, and Pallister that is, and I'd played for the under-21s, but my career was starting to dip, that's a fact. So I think it was a fairly brave decision, but it was also something that I think, in order for the rest of what's happened to happen, it had to happen. Not that I needed a fresh start away from Middlesbrough, I needed to give myself a fresh start, full stop. And as I say, having just been married, both me and Julie, kind of moving from the northeast down to London was us setting off on our journey, if you like. And again, because Bruce and me had always got on really well, he wanted to, he kind of wanted to try and help me resurrect myself as a player, because you know, we all have ups and downs with form and with injury and this, that and the other, but there was only one way my career was going had I not moved. And luckily, you know, having had 2 years in London, and it kind of worked out for the better, really.
You touched on the people you worked with there and playing for England as well. You got 2 caps while you were at Forest, and one of those games was against Brazil, playing against likes of Ronaldo and Roberto
Juninho.
Carlos, and of course Juninho as well, who some will be a teammate later down the line at Middlesbrough. So how did that feel, playing for England first of all?
It was amazing because it came right out the blue. I mean, we had had a wonderful season at Forest, no question. And yeah, so we'd gone on at the end of the season. We'd been asked to go on a tour of Singapore and Australia. So basically, we'd landed in Singapore, and we were getting prepared. We were going to play the Singapore national team on the evening or the day after we'd landed. And basically, after the game, I got a shout from Frank, just saying, "Listen, just so you know, Terry Venables has put you on standby for the England squad." But he said the difference between this one is because it's a summer tournament. He said all of the standby players are going in training as well. He said, so basically, you know, they've called you in as a standby player, and there was me and Richard Shaw, who'd had a brilliant season at Coventry at the time as well, had been called in on standby. So then the only thing that Frank said, he said, the only thing is we can't get you a flight from Singapore. You're going to have to travel down to Australia with us to travel back to England. So we played the Singapore national team, we beat them. And then we travelled down to Adelaide to play a game down there. So basically, like Frank said, listen, you don't have to play. He said, but it'll maybe do you some good. So I ended up flying into Adelaide, having 3 or 4 hours sleep on the afternoon, played against Adelaide on the evening, and then first thing the next morning I was on a flight back to England, back to Heathrow to have to get myself home. Get myself prepared to go and join up with England. So, and then again, the next little, so obviously that was a wonderful, you know, it was something wonderful that, you know, because I'd played for the 21s, but this was 6 years later. I played for the 21s until I was 22-year-old. And then, you know, I was 28 when this happened. So, so I went into the England camp, again, looking at the people that were there at the time, some wonderful, wonderful players. And then the next lucky break happened that I was only on standby, and then Andy Cole picked up an injury, and Terry just said to me, he said, you're coming off the standby list, you're in the squad. So I trained. Terry had said to Stuart Pearce, who was also on the squad, along with Stan Collymore as well, so there's 3 of us, which was brilliant for Forest as well. He just said, listen, I like what I'm seeing with Colin. He said, how do you think he handles a big occasion? And Stuart went, well, he's handled everything that we've done over the years. So I got put on the bench for the home game against Japan at Wembley. Obviously didn't get on, and then he obviously gave me a start at Ellen Road, which was you know, obviously a lot closer to home for the family, and which was wonderful. I mean, it was a tough game. Henrik Larsson gave me a bit of a run around, him and Kenneth Anderson. That was tough for an international debut. And Pally limped off at half time. Me and Pally had played centre back for the first. He limped off at half time. So yeah, it was while it was wonderful, it was a tough baptism, the Sweden game. And then Terry just said, he said, listen, you know, you'll be playing again on against the Brazilians. So obviously you've got time to think. And obviously the Brazilian team at the time, you know, some wonderful, wonderful talent. So for me, it was kind of the one thing I said when I joined the FA. All the coaches said, "How was it?" I said, "I don't know, because I've never watched it back. Never watched myself play, because we drew 3-3 with Sweden. Obviously got beat 3-1 at Wembley against Brazil. So I'm thinking I must have been really, really rubbish. So I'm not sure I want to watch that. So I've never watched them back. But obviously Juninho played. Ronaldo was only 19, I think, at the time he played. Edmundo, who was another wonderful Brazilian striker. So yeah, over the course of my 2 internationals, I think I played against 4 world-class strikers and kind of lost to all 4 of them, really. But again, for the family, for me, it was kind of the pinnacle of what I'd set out as a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old. And you go back to Keith Taylor, my sports teacher at Trimlin Village Primary School. You go back to him. he had as much to do with me playing for England as anybody else, really. So yeah, the pathway, you know, the plot of your pathway is you've got to get lucky. You've got to get really lucky. Some people might not say it's luck, but believe me, you've got to meet the right people at the right times along your journey.
Obviously, a proud achievement, of course, and as you mentioned previously, you became a linchpin when you came back up to Boro. And obviously, you were part of the cup run early on in the stages in 2004 when we obviously went to go on and lift the trophy for the first time in our history. Yeah. And you had a loan spell at Sunderland as well. I mean, a few games there. I mean, what was that kind of like around that time for you?
Well, the end bit was difficult, really. You know, because we came back and I was in my opinion, I was in really good form. Really enjoyed my first 2 or 3 seasons back at the club. Then obviously, like I say, we had the dip. I was having a dip. I had a boost from Terry. We stayed in the division. Terry offered me a new deal, so at this point I was wherever I was 35, I guess. And then obviously Brian left. Terry decided not to stay on, and that was when Steve came in. And you know, from the very start, you know, Steve, you know, looked at me as I was 35. I was still fit, enjoying my football. But you know, he brought in Gareth, he brought in Hugo, who were again 2 wonderful men and wonderful players. And yeah, it was always going to be a struggle. But you know, I had my kind of run-ins with Steve only because I felt as though I was still good enough to be playing in the team, and I did. I played a lot, or relatively. Frequently or infrequently with Steve, and I would always have a few run-ins, and you know, he would always make it. He said, "Listen, Colin, this is not personal." He said, I've got a job to do," and I would say, "Well, it feels personal because if there's any doubt, I'm always the one that has to go." So we had that, but you know, that's probably me as a 35, 36-year-old thinking, is it coming to an end? Is it coming? And I'm fighting. So I'm as fit as I've ever been. I think I'm playing really well, and in actual fact, I got told a story that. How true it is, I don't know. Whether it's a bit of hearsay, that we played 1 game away at Aston Villa, and apparently Sven was in the stand watching the game, and I had a really good game, and apparently Sven had asked someone about me, and well, again, how much I don't know whether the truth's or not, but apparently. The chairman had turned around to him and said, "Sven, he's 36, just leave him alone." Apparently he was going to pick me in the next England squad because I'd played. But at 36, that obviously wasn't going to happen. And then over the course of time, the one thing I would say about having the run-ins as a football stroke coach with Steve McLaren was the one thing he did do is he said to me, he said, "Listen, one thing that I was given an opportunity to do as a player coming to the end was why don't you spend some time during the week working with the academy with the young players and get to learn that side of things?" And he said, so I did. So I started working with Dave Parnaby and the under-18s, and yeah, it was even though Steve was closing down one side of me, he actually helped me open up the other side. And let's not forget, you know, unfortunately at 35 I nearly chucked it all anyway after we lost Finn. So. You know, to actually be back in and involved, I really should have been a little bit more grateful than I was. But I was still fighting because I thought I was good enough to play. But yeah, so Steve gave me the opportunity to start on the coaching side, start getting me badges, and working with the under-18s. And Dave Parnaby was the next person who was a great mentor for me, stepping from playing to be a coach. And you know, Dave's reputation at Middlesbrough, and rightly so. Was brilliant because what he did with the academy from the first day of the academy opening to where it was when he left 15 years later, wherever it was phenomenal, really. You know, again, going back to the 13-year-old, always giving young players an opportunity to play in the first team if they're good enough. That's not changed and will not change, I think, at that football club, and hopefully not. So that's kind of where the playing thing ended. And the one thing I would say again, just for Steve McLaren was, you know, that day at Fulham, when the whole team was a team that had been brought up through the academy, and he put me on the bench and put me on the pitch for the last 10 minutes. So Lee Cattermole had taken my role as being the youngest ever Middlesbrough captain, but handed me the armband as I walk on the pitch as a 39-year-old, making me the oldest ever Middlesbrough captain. So that was a nice way to kind of bring it to an end.
Like I say, quite a poignant end there really to your playing career. Obviously, you moved into coaching off the back of that, and as you mentioned there. I mean, was that something you always wanted to do, coaching, or was it?
Do you know what? You don't know. I mean, but even as a player, as a 19, 20-year-old, I used to help my dad. My dad was one of the guys who helped run this Sunday team called South East Durham Boys out where I am, out where my mum still lives, and so I used to go and help. I used to go and help my dad run the teams, the kids teams, you know, under 12s, under 13s, whatever. And so whether there was something in there or not, I don't know. But certainly, I think, again, going back to the people who'd had an influence on me, and the reason they'd had an influence, whether it's an older players giving me a hand as a younger player when I was at Middlesbrough, or whether me as an older player helping younger players, it just kind of felt natural. And like I say, Steve and Dave Parnaby give me that opportunity to kind of go onto that side. The thing I learned as much as anything is like when I actually retired from playing, if you like, I'd been privileged to be able to sit in the office and listen to how Steve Round and Paul Barron and Steve Harrison used to plan, structure, training sessions and training weeks and training months, and how far they used to plan in advance. So from that point of view, having very early on in my coaching cycle, been able to listen to people like that, the planning and the organisation of structuring how your weeks and months look, I think was something that, you know, once I'd been in there, that was when I thought, you know, I'd really like to go back and work with senior players if I get the chance. And obviously Gareth, after Steve went to England, post the UEFA Cup final, Gareth got the chance, but I then came from 18s to, you know, the old-fashioned reserve team, the under-23s, 21s. So I worked there for 6 months because we had some cracking young players coming through at the time. And then I think it was at the Christmas time, and Gareth just said, listen, he said, you know, it's difficult for us because we're both brand new to this. He said, but I need you with me. So I kind of left the reserve team behind and went to work up in the first team with Gareth. And it was, you know, I mean, the first season was great, you know, finished on a massive high, obviously. The second season was really, really tough. And tough for us, I think, as certainly as defenders, the amount of goals that we conceded. In the Premier League, we studied long into the night about, you know, how we could stop us conceding goals, and from set pieces in particular was something that really frustrated us, I remember. But yeah, these are the things where you learn, and we were both very new, and I think, you know, and again, you bring it forward to where Middlesbrough is now, and you look at the comparison between Jonathan getting his first opportunity and Gareth getting his first opportunity. Gareth has said, you know, because obviously I've worked with him at the FA, Gareth has said many times that, again, the experience he's having with the national setup now, had he not had that at Middlesbrough, he wouldn't have had the learning curve that he gets to where he gets now. And you know, I know the thinking and the processes that go behind planning things at international level, having worked there. And I just remember going back and thinking about how Steve McLaren and Steve Round and Steve Harrison and Paul Barron and used to plan and plot and plan, and then you work into the international setup, and you know, it is, with all due respect, a lot of it is about making sure you've got a really good plan in place, and then everything, because players will pick at anything. Any little chink in any arm of the players will say, what are we doing that for, and what are we doing that for? And if you don't have an answer, they'll keep chipping and keep chipping and keep chipping. So yeah, the one thing I've learned is that as a coach, as a person, you've got to have a really strong plan. And I think, you know, again, not comparing to Jonathan, to Gareth in any way, shape or form, but, you know, whatever happens at Middlesbrough this season, next season, and hopefully long into the future with Jonathan at the helm, and hopefully Middlesbrough get through this season and hopefully kick on. You know, in 5 years' time, Jonathan Woodgate will be a completely different coach to what he is now. In the last 3-4 years, I'm a completely different coach. On the last 5 years, I'm a completely different coach, stroke, whatever you want to call it, to the guy who got the opportunity to be manager at Hartlepool United. I'm a completely different person. I understand football so differently than what I did back then.
Along with your coaching, which you started after you finished playing, of course, one thing you did do was a lot of charity work off the back of that, as you mentioned, your son Finley, you set up the Colin Cooper Fund, which you brought to a close last year, and you raised a lot of money off the back of that for some great causes as well. And it must be great to feel that you've left something, you know, like a legacy for your, you know, for your son.
Absolutely. Listen, you know, from my wife puts it much more succinctly than I did, or I can, because at that point she found yoga, and she puts it in, you know, she was probably in her darkest place as a person, having lost her son. And for a father, I was in exactly the same place. And basically, what we had to do is we had to find something to focus our minds on. We've got 3 beautiful daughters as well, and my eldest has only just been married, so I'm a proud father. And my eldest now is a wife to her husband. So yeah, the setting up of the Colin Cooper Fund was something that we felt helped us. It was very cathartic, that we felt as though we had such a loss, yet to be able to do something so positive in his name for so many other children and families that may be having a rough time, or might have an illness or life limiting, or whatever you want to call it, or just to go into a rough time as a family. To be able to do that for the last 12, 13 years, I have to say, is far outweighed what we thought it could ever be. And raising 700 grand and and being able to distribute that out, and you know, and I know people, you know, we've been so lucky to meet so many people who've been so grateful for the work that we've done, and we've had so many wonderful people support us and help us raise this staggering amount of money, really, for a charity with only 5 people. Yeah, we're very, very proud, privileged, and, you know, don't get me wrong, you know, Finley would be it would be 20 in December, and of course I wish he was still here, but you know, we weren't fortunate enough for that to happen. So what we've done in the years hence is as you rightly said, to create a legacy, and that was what when we were bringing it to an end, that was the one thing we wanted to do, just to carry on Finn's name, and luckily we've been able to do that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time.
Absolute pleasure.